Okay, so we'll have a look at the paper that you've just done, starting off with the population in transition question. Here you can see it's got a map. Let's look at this map in detail, and you'll see that there are actually three sets of information. We can see by these arrows the direction of migration, and we can also see by the thickness of the arrow how many migrants are moving. So you can see here, for example, the arrow here in this region relates to the very large number of 2.5 million migrants. You can also see the Human Development Index as well, and that's quite important if you're going to get the top level for this question. You can see that they've got this area here, the central area, very low Human Development Index. So the sorts of things that they'll be expecting you to say. They would expect you to use those numbers. So the numbers here are very important. They relate to the thickness of the arrows, and we've got three thicknesses of arrows which you can see here. So they'd expect you to have numbers in to get the full marks. When I've graded your work, I think I've been very generous on this and not really insisted on those numbers. I should have really insisted on having those numbers. So many of you have already picked up on that there is a general movement from the central provinces to the coastal areas, in particular the areas here on the southeast part of China. But that, of course, that's not the only movement. We also have a movement to this area here, which is the Tibetan highlands. We do have people moving from the central towards the west. And then again, in your answer, what you could put there is actually start quoting these numbers. They would really love you if they do that. Also, as well, you'll notice in general there is a trend of migration not only from the central areas to the coastal areas, or the central areas to the western areas of Tibet, this area here, but also there is a drift from areas with a low high development index, 0 to 0.6, that's this central area, to areas of higher higher Human Development Index. And that's a really important point to make. And you might actually, if you dig down further into the figures, you can see here the largest migration, which is from this region to the coastal areas, is actually from the area with the lowest high Human Development Index to the area with the highest Human Development Index. So here we can see that drift from low Human Development Index here, 2.5 million people moving to the area of high development index. So there, describe the pattern of internal migration. Having said that, this is only worth 3 marks, so you need to be clear in exactly what you need to talk about. Okay. Next question here, which asks you to briefly explain 3 positive social economic impacts of migration. Here this is a 2 + 2 + 2 question. So really what they're asking you to do is make a statement about it, and then what they say is they actually want you to expand on that statement. Most of you have got the fact that they need to be socio-economic. There's no requirement here to have a mixture of social and economic things. So some examples would be here, which most of you got, things like increased labour force. If you were just to leave it at increased labour force and say nothing else at all, you get 1 out of the 2 available marks. You need to go on to say increase of labour force, and this is a surplus of cheap labour for industry. That's enough for the 1 + 1, so that'll get 2. Other ones you could look at are increased in consumer market. It stimulates the economy, all of those people moving in. You've also talked about government investment. Again, more investment by the government, 1 mark. Improved infrastructure and services helping businesses, 1 further mark. 1 + 1 = 2, incredibly enough. So carrying on, this question caused people here quite a few problems. So let's highlight that. So the question in its entirety says, explain why an imbalance in the birth ratio exists in some societies. It's this two words here that quite a few people stumbled up on. It's birth ratio. And what it specifically means by birth ratio is the number of males and females. Normally we would expect this to be round about 50-50. In reality, there's slightly more females than there are males, but it's not a massive imbalance. In general, we expect it to be 50-50. Sometimes we don't have that ratio, and the reason here that I would suggest that you look at is the one-child policy. The one-child policy, you will know, has resulted in there being far more boys, far more males in the Chinese population than there are females. Reasons for this are selective sex abortions. That's really skewed the birth ratio. Ultrasound technology, that has allowed people to identify the babies and give people a choice if they want to keep the baby or not, based on the sex of the baby. In particular, with Chinese cultures and Indian cultures as well, not exclusively those two countries, boys are favoured to carry on the family name. With India, you might like to talk about girls are a less favourable option, as lovely as they are, because the parents have to pay a dowry in the case of India. But really, this is the one-child policy and causing that differences between the number of males that are born and the number of females. Notice that we'll go back, we'll look at that word again, birth ratio. A lot of you just talked about births in general. Specifically, it's birth ratio. You see that, drum that into your mind. Birth ratio, it's the balance between male and female students. What we're going to do is we're going to have a chat about this in class, and maybe you can download yourself a copy of this examination paper, if you like, along with a mark scheme, and try to give some model answers in the classroom.